It's funny that almost all my problems with Arkham City's gameplay have to do with agency, or lack thereof. That so many of my criticisms can be boiled down to not fully being in control. I will delve into the storytelling, world, and art direction as well, in this critique that originally targeted the whole Arkham series, before being limited mostly to one game for time. They're not truly bad games, but designing for such a broad group of players by streamlining the controls and intentionally making the mechanics shallow is, in a way, even worse. Rocksteady Studios never made me feel as if I controlled the real Batman. Arkham City's free flow system never engages the player in the way a fighting system should. The player only gets to drive Batman's legs until he delivers the first hit, at which point the game takes over and begins to pull him to his enemies. Regardless of how far away the enemy is, Batman will automatically take the necessary number of linear steps for the player. Briefly tilting the analog stick will pull him to a specific target, but that's only required when the camera is not pointed towards that target. If the player separates from that automation, meaning move around on their own so that the game no longer pulls them from enemy to enemy, even very briefly, their combo is broken and their attacks become weaker again. You are not encouraged to take back control, and so never get a sense of the foot movement and positioning that play such vital roles in almost any martial arts. All threats from any direction can be countered without navigating or can be evaded by double tapping the run button. Even 3 enemies standing around Batman hardly pose a threat, as the player simply taps the counter button rapidly and watches an elaborate animation take care of the trio. Only swords and knives require them to pull away while countering. The warning icons above enemies' heads are only removed in New Game Plus, and can't be turned off in Riddler's Revenge, the collection of challenge maps. Since the combat is built around those warning icons, enemies don't have tells or adequate wind-ups like in other action games. They attack as soon as they are at arm's length of Batman. As long as you remember that, you will be perfectly fine even without the warning icons. Batman moves far faster than his opponents, who serve as little more than punching bags thanks in part to the generous counter system.
We'll make sure this hurts you, Batman. We'll make sure this hurts you, Batman. Just you guys?
Every 7th combo is awarded with a special move that permanently incapacitates any of the hurt enemies. After upgrading, it only takes 5. Rocksteady wanted to make the player feel like a Batman who is so well trained and powerful that he doesn't struggle in a fight, but it feels more like a rhythm exercise for points and doesn't look like any Batman fight I ever saw.
Don't worry, Batman. He's mostly harmless. Get it?
Only the games make his fights so consistently one-sided, weightless, and ridiculous from second to second. He glides over the floor or twirls up into the air with no catapult, zipping from enemy to enemy, almost like he's playing the Flash in a Chinese wuxia movie. As if he can shift gravity in different directions. His domination should be earned through skill and practice, not given away with superhuman agility, attacks that can be so easily anticipated, and automation or streamlining. Imagine the alternative. The player moves Batman freely around the arena. They must pay attention to where the enemies are and position Batman where he will be most effective and not in immediate harm. That sounds more engaging to me than a system that automates almost all of the foot movement and simplifies defense. Beat-em-ups, or games with unarmed combat against large numbers of opponents, don't need automation like this when the player can move freely and has the moveset and tools to handle crowds. I don't see why a three-dimensional Batman game couldn't implement crowd handling mechanics similar to those in games like the Streets of Rage series. Enemies in Streets of Rage slam into each other when thrown. These collisions could be expanded in a Batman game, with powerful attacks like flying kicks causing enemies to bump into each other, briefly staggering the second person and giving the player a little more room. A special attack takes care of enemies both behind and in front of the hero, while making them invulnerable at the cost of health. The special attack can also be used to separate from the enemy's grabs. Players can perform rear attacks without turning around. The Mega Drive or Genesis controller has an ABC arrangement of buttons, where pressing B and C, which are the normal attack and jump, simultaneously triggers the rear attack. Modern controllers have 4 buttons arranged in a diamond. If the left face button made Batman attack, made him throw a punch, and the bottom face button let him jump, then pressing the thumb on both could trigger the rear attack. Accidental jumps could be prevented by having the player drop the part of their thumb closer to the knuckle on the jump button only immediately after depressing the attack button with the tip. Fighters in Streets of Rage can pick up and use pipes, bottles, bats, and other objects until they break. These temporary weapons can also be thrown. Arkham Knight, the third game in Rocksteady's trilogy, did let players pick up and use weapons, but they were never longer than an arm and could only be used on one enemy at a time. They also couldn't be thrown, if I remember correctly. Since Batman often climbs and grabs ledges and such anyway, I would use R2, the right trigger, as a grab button, allowing the player to throw enemies and pick up those types of melee weapons. They could then use that weapon with the attack button, drop it by pressing the grab button again, or throw it by pressing the attack and grab buttons simultaneously. The attacks in Streets of Rage are simplistic and quick rather than intricate like in the Arkham games, but that snappiness too helps to make me feel that I am in control. I wouldn't animate all these different counters that slow the fighting and disrupt player input. Just have Batman keep his fists raised defensively while the player holds R1, the right shoulder button. As he takes the hits, a status bar representing his poise gradually depletes. He would only be protected in the front, and not all attacks could be blocked. It would be nice if there was also breakable furniture that you could jump on top of, throw enemies into, and flip over for cover. The arenas in the Arkham games are mostly empty. After watching so many Batman fights, I can't imagine controlling him without a lock-on system. Locking on prevents the character from turning around and exposing their back to the enemy as soon as the player tries to pull away from their attacks or gain space. It allows two fighters to dance. I would assign the lock-on to L1 as a hold function. The player would switch to the next closest target ahead and back, both by pressing down the left stick, meaning the L3 button, and by letting go of L1 and quickly locking on again. This system, called Z-targeting, was common before Demon Souls and Dark Souls popularized the R3 lock-on. I prefer the older system because it's not a toggle thanks to the button not actuating at the base of a tilting stick. Because it's so easy to keep the button depressed and the function is actively felt rather than only seen, the player is more aware that it is active, and the ability to run backwards and sideways is just built in even when there is no target. This can make lining yourself up for things in the environment outside of combat a little bit easier. If you wanted to be really creative, you could even let the player move sideways between narrow walls without triggering the usual canned animation. Ocarina of Time and later Zelda games had toggle options, and I always hated them. I would not lock the camera behind Batman while the targeting system is active. It cuts off too much visibility. You can't see what you back into. Using the jump button with the lock-on button would allow my player to perform a kind of dodge. However, to make them use as many of the fight mechanics as possible, have them heed the positions of their enemies and hopefully keep them moving, jumping to the side or backwards would not be effective against every attack or type of enemy. I would also include a light auto-targeting system without the locking on and strafing that activates when the player comes very close to an enemy. Nowhere near as generous as it is in the Arkham games or something like Bayonetta, only strong enough that the player or the character doesn't end up punching air instead of the opponent they face, making the game still playable without locking on. Arkham's free flow system allows Batman to fight many more enemies than games with lock-on systems, but that's not a positive. Do I really have to point out how ridiculous it looks for Batman to fight 20 men at the same time, with only the few closest to him willing to attack while the rest wait their turns? The predictable attacks and automation make fights in Arkham City so easy that the sneaking had to be completely separated in what are called predator maps. Enemies in predator maps are far deadlier. Trying to fight them head-on will quickly get Batman shot to death. It's kind of bizarre. They react to your presence instantly, like they have a sixth sense, and with perfect composure, but are not scripted for effective pursuit. Their eyesight is poorer than in most stealth action games, and they don't watch while closing in on your position. Is there incompetence by design?
I lost him.
gotta find him, now! Time to die! I got him! He's over here!
Don't know where you've gone, Bat, but this ain't over! Where is he?
Where he is? I can't see him. He could come from anywhere.
The Predator maps are highly context sensitive, with playground floor grills, catwalks, gargoyles, and other designated spots favored over natural movement, so densely packed together that the player inevitably performs the wrong actions or struggles to prompt the desired one. They crouch by a railing in order to hang, but the game keeps offering corner cover.
You cannot hide forever, Batman. There you are.
They try to go under a grate, but the game pulls them towards another waist-high object. The run button also being the interact button while crouched means that Batman will attach to these waist-high objects as you switch back and forth between the crouch and upright movements. Mouse and keyboard users have all these functions assigned to the space bar and controller users to the bottom face button. Everyone is affected. But at least for controller users, the smoke pellet only takes over the counter and stealth takedowns when they are discovered. For those of us who use a mouse and keyboard, the single smoke pellet that Batman carries also supplants the aiming of all other gadgets, making it even easier to deploy it by accident. Controller users also don't aim gadgets when they mean to perform stealth takedowns. Both are handled with the right mouse button, unfortunately. You can't even separate from certain walls without giving away your position.
This room locked down tight. I need to find a different way in.
You can hardly do anything creative and cool because of how scripted and magnetic almost all the available actions are and how twitchy the enemies are. The unconscious can't even be dragged away where they hopefully won't be found. The antagonist of the area always announces over a loudspeaker that one of the men is down, and then they come running to him.
She's all alone down here with...
Oh, I think I just heard someone's skull cracking against that nice hard floor. I'm the bloody...
You heard the Joker!
Penguin's keeping track of his crew using heartbeat monitors. He'll know each time I take someone out. I need to move quickly.
Good enough for me.
I'm one man down. That's no good, is it? Still, I'm sure the rest of you will do your best not to disappoint me.
Transitioning between stealth and action in the same map would have added so much dimension to the encounters. Imagine Batman being overwhelmed in a fight and throwing down a smoke grenade, or rupturing a steam pipe, or cutting through some flour so that he can find a position from which to stalk again. Or he runs behind the geometry and makes another turn, or climbs before the opponents can catch up and see where he went. After stealthily taking down a few more, another fight ensues. The encounter doesn't just end with them instantly locking their guns on Batman and killing him.
Freeze!
How can you possibly make a Batman game without incorporating darkness as a stealth mechanic? Why can't any of the lights be turned off, cut, or destroyed, like in the Thief and Splinter Cell games that preceded Arkham Asylum?
Hello? Who did that?
The light doesn't need to be as weirdly isolated to one small spot as it is in Splinter Cell. I also wouldn't want everyone in the game willfully living and working in such darkness as if electricity costs a fortune. You would think CIA headquarters would at least keep this security checkpoint lit. But it absolutely should be a feature in a modern Batman game. As his puppeteer learns to master the darkness, some enemies would adapt with flashlights, night vision goggles, and fires. Light could blind them as well after their eyes have adjusted to the darkness. Why does every single modern third-person game with sneaking force the low crouch? It slows the action and just doesn't look good. Even The Legend of Zelda recently adopted this tedious feature. I'm glad that Arkham City isn't one of the countless games in which the crouch quiets the character's footsteps, since that isn't how noise works. It also doesn't make Batman invisible at a distance like in those other games.
What the? There you are, Bat. Get over here.
But because the crouch is the only speed available between the walk that's quiet and the semi-full run that's noisy, you still are driven to crouch in most of the Predator encounter. Isn't it funny that Batman moves faster in a crouching position than his upright enemies can run? I would still include a crouch, assign it to the right face button, but it would mostly be used to hide behind objects, take cover from gunfire, and access low spaces. The player could also duck under certain attacks and strike while crouched. A forward roll could be performed by briefly holding the crouch button while fully tilting the stick. I would also let the player use the aforementioned grab button, R2, to take unaware enemies from behind or the side. They could then be incapacitated with the attack button or dragged and used as a hostage, maybe even interrogated with one of the buttons on the D-pad and carried into the air with the rappel gun. In fact, I would let the player take enemies in combat as well if they can get behind or beside them. No reason for the mechanics to change just because Batman has been discovered. You should be able to quickly knock some out with the special attack as well if they don't see you coming and have no time to brace themselves. Seeing through walls diminishes tension and feels like a cheat. The player always knows what's around the corner and barely has to track enemies. I can't remember if Arkham Asylum had a scientific explanation for Batman's X-ray vision, but it would be invalidated by Catwoman having the ability as well. Few of Arkham City's tools or gadgets are fun to use. Only about half of them are true to this version of the character. The explosive gel, freeze blast, and remote electrical charge all basically do the same thing in combat: stun enemies. This pacifistic version of Batman would never detonate explosives beneath men's feet. Exploded enemies don't stay stunned long enough for the gel to be of much use in that capacity. You can choose the order of the 3 explosions by looking at the gel in first-person view. I also can't imagine Batman freezing people after seeing how victims of the gun's prior owner suffered.
He's pulling through. The hot chemical bath did the trick.
To be fair, the freezing process seems weirdly harmless in this version of Batman.
Stay where I can see you, Batman. You wouldn't believe the fight the old snowman put up. When you're done in here, feel free to join me in the Iceberg Lounge so I can kick your ass again. Enjoy the copsicle.
In Predator maps, the only effective use of the remote electrical charge is powering generators and zapping anyone nearby. The reverse battering and sonic battering are too specific in their uses to be noteworthy. You're lucky if the sonic battering has the effect you want, and it's usually easy enough to go right up to your prey. Knocking on a wall or throwing a rock would have served the same purpose.
What's that sound?
The remote-controlled Batarang is ridiculous, steering like a slow drone. The line launcher is just another stun weapon. You can push enemies off catwalks or over railings with it, but a flying kick or throw in a better Batman game would have done the same thing. It's kind of useful at the beginning of a fight though, before the combo is started. It also lets you speed past tedious level design.
Allow Gotham to rise like Lazarus, becoming a beacon of hope for this world. Are you intrigued?
If you thought Batman's explosive gel wasn't designed to be lethal, then I'm sorry to tell you that the upgraded disruptor can detonate the enemy mines under their own feet. The disruptor is not limited to electrical devices. It can also jam guns somehow.
I've got visual on the target. I see Batman.
The normal Batarang and smoke pellet are alright.
What the? Smoke!
I would limit Batman's tools more, opting for smaller gadgets that can fit in his pockets, or at least look a little more reasonable. He would carry maybe 3 Batarangs, which the player needs to pick up again if they want any later in the campaign. I will speak more about the length of the campaign later. To make up for this limit, the player could use plenty of environmental objects as distractions and weapons. Some crates on a platform above could be dropped on enemies by cutting a rope. Barrels or logs could be released, rolling into and incapacitating enemies, or disorienting them for an easier fight. What is Batman if not resourceful? Batman's tools would be assigned to L2, the left trigger. The player would aim the Batarang, smoke pellets, grapple gun, and other gadgets by holding L2 and use them by letting go. They could quick fire by quickly double tapping and put the gadget away with R1, the block button. My reason for not letting the player aim the gadget with L2 and use it with R2 like in the Arkham games is because my system would already use R2 as a grab button. Leaving the button free for grabs would allow my Batman to use gadgets while holding people and climbing. The goal is to limit the kinds of conflicting actions that the Arkham series is plagued by. I wouldn't want to scroll through a bunch of different items with the D-pad. You run the risk of scrolling too far and having to cycle back. You could bring up the whole inventory in a small corner menu by tapping just one of the directional buttons. This corner menu would arrange Batman's tools in an efficient grid. The Arkham inventory isn't too far off. I just never used the menu because the number row of my keyboard gave me immediate access to all the gadgets. To be honest, I don't even understand how to quickfire certain gadgets with a controller. I select the gadget with the D-pad, but when I double tap the right trigger he uses a different one. Strange control scheme. Also largely automated is the environmental traversal. You hold the run button and Batman automatically jumps over gaps, climbs onto higher platforms, and hops over obstacles. They probably put this in Arkham Asylum because people were so impressed by the Bourne Identity-inspired chases in Assassin's Creed 2 years before, 3 years if you go all the way back to the first gameplay demonstrations.
We place the player in complete control of the environment. Just like if you guys are familiar with le parcours or free running, basically you can go anywhere. So any architectural detail like you're seeing right now is interactive. Everything is interactive. There is no level design path. This is going to give us a good opportunity to show off our chase AI. We've made Talal have his own personality in the chase. And no two chases will be the same. Basically, he's a cocky guy, he's overconfident, he set this trap for you. If you get far behind, he's gonna stop and wait for you and taunt you. Okay, Patrice has gone up here to try and do something that Talal can't do, which is free running. Try and use that time away from the crowd to catch up with him. Awesome. That's all we have time for tonight.
It's just like protagonists in so many story-driven games gravitating like magnets towards platforms after the player jumps, or stopping at the edge of a drop, all designed to keep the player from failing and supposedly hurting the cinematic presentation. Most of us would be unhappy if Super Mario automatically jumped at the end of a platform and the game took care of the distance or trajectory to the next platform. But for some reason we just accept these things in story-driven AAA games. The possibility of failing a jump makes success more satisfying. You can't make a Batman game without a jump button because of who he is and what he does. They easily could have put a dedicated jump in there by letting the player run without holding that button on the face of the controller, if the tilt of the analog stick covered the whole range of movement. While jumping, the player could have kicked by pressing the attack button. The Batman game of my dreams would have also let them slam down with the special attack, the top face button, and dive into a roll by tapping the crouch button, the right face button, during the jump. The lack of fall damage only makes the world blander. Batman's cape always catches enough wind right before he hits the ground. I would remove the parachute function completely, as well as the glide. Batman rarely glided in other media. It was always at far higher speeds and usually involved a glider. Grapple points should also be specific, with the player having to aim at the flagpole or railing or whatever it is. Their aim would be assisted by slow motion as they fall or swing through the air. I could do without the automatic grabbing of ledges. The old Tomb Raider games required you to press the action button. You could hold it during the jump so that Lara Croft reached out until making contact. I would do the same thing with that grab button that I talked about earlier. The player would need to hold the grab button for the duration of a climb and while swinging on a horizontal pole or pipe. Speaking of poles and pipes, it would be nice if you could make Batman do a twirl by quickly tapping the jump button again as he lets go at the height of a swing for extra distance. Water is like lava in the Arkham games. When you include the side content, there are so many floating sequences that it makes you wonder why Rocksteady couldn't cut a few hundred Riddler trophies and build a good diving and swimming system instead.
Infestations. Understand?
In the flooded chamber of the museum is a shark. If you can avoid falling into the water, only one brief encounter with it is guaranteed. It clumsily bites down on Batman's raft, never to be seen again. A diving system would have taken you into its domain for a thrilling fight. The lock-on and grab mechanics I suggested could also work underwater with enough time, money, and effort. When you're not fighting in an arena, the field of view is cramped. There is not much visibility around Batman, particularly in denser interiors. This means that the player has to adjust the camera much more. It may explain, at least in part, why the walk speed is forced, why the player has to hold the face button to go faster. I would have just pulled the camera back more and let the player center the camera behind Batman by pressing down the right stick, the R3 button. If my Batman game had a first-person view, it would be assigned to one of the buttons on the D-pad rather than R3. Parts of the story have you playing as Catwoman. Sadly, Rocksteady simply forced her character onto a city and mechanics built for Batman. She doesn't have a grappling gun and so needed a whip that stretched to ridiculous distances in order to easily go where Batman went. What does the whip cling to? What kind of glue is attached to the cracker? Even with that magical whip, she still had to pounce gradually up to her target, which involved tapping the repel button repeatedly. Her last chapter features fences inexplicably placed under ceiling equipment that she can somehow crawl on. She also doesn't have a cape that can soften her falls, and yet she ropes up hostiles just like Batman despite having even fewer pockets. You can't control how far from the gargoyles she lands. In spite of her high heels, she can run right up to enemies without making a noise. I guess I still prefer that over crouching all the time as Batman. Why did Arkham City and its sequels need to have big open worlds if the player repelled and glided over everything anyway? After getting the grapple boost, you can fly endlessly. The overworld connecting the various interiors has nothing of interest aside from a few chaptered side quests, some challenges, and the hundreds of trophies that you need in order to defeat the Riddler, which could have been placed in a linear game too. A marker always tells you exactly where you need to go.
I've got the code. I'm heading to Wonder Tower.
Good. You're doing the right thing. The code should let you enter via the guard room near the main gate.
Don't lose Talia's signal. When I'm finished in the tower, I'm going after her. She doesn't know Joker. She's out of her depth. I need to save her.
Really? You needed to interrupt my game so that I could see on the map the giant tower that Oracle and Batman just talked about? You couldn't let me search the perimeter and find the entrance on my own? The whole adventure is so linear and guided. As a side note, even after collecting all the Riddler trophies in Rocksteady's trilogy years ago, I must say that they are absurd. The stories and art direction take themselves so seriously, while the glowing question marks, traps, and button contraptions are like something out of a cartoon collectathon.
Are you alright? Did something happen? All the readings from your suit just went red.
Just give me a minute. I'll be alright.
No, You won't. Hurry! You're running out of time.
Man, what's in these things?
Guns, explosives, thermal trackers.
To kick Penguin's ass. But
That's it. I'm getting out of here, and then I'm telling everyone what Strange did in here.
What's wrong with the Riddler freak? Hasn't he got better things to do than just leave green question marks all over Arkham City?
Some of the Riddler trophies are clever, but the areas are so big that they all have to be placed on the map for you, which means that finding them is not even gratifying.
Please don't lie to me. I only just got Riddler's last informant's blood off my face.
Oh God, no. I'll tell you everything.
That's what I wanted to hear.
I would prefer a linear Batman adventure because of how much easier it is to concentrate good level design along a path. That path should still be expansive, however. If the player is going to feel like the acrobatic Batman who thinks on his feet and finds a way into any building or room, surprising criminals and allies alike, then there have to be alternate routes. Maintenance corridors, stairs, fire escapes, crawl spaces, elevators and elevator shafts, pipes and poles, rafters, construction equipment, spaces between walls, a few apartments. Maybe keys and security codes could be hidden in the world. Maybe new paths could be opened as you interact with machinery. I don't know if Batman's investigative abilities need to be incorporated mechanically. If we are going to play the detective, then it has to be smarter than what the Arkham games did. I would honestly rather watch a cutscene than use the evidence scanner to search for a linear series of clues or brainlessly dial through letters with the decryptor until they slow and the correct ones chime. The developer must have known that the decryptor was tedious, since dialing the right set of letters to the left and the left set of letters to the right at the same time matches up the two halves of the words almost every time, at least until New Game Plus. Arkham City has a lot of needless busy work that sometimes makes for unintuitive game design. I disabled Penguin's communications disruptor and moved on to the next one, only to go back after looking at my tracker and realizing that I was supposed to punch through the other two terminals as well. Even though Batman said the disruptor has 3 terminals and that all of them needed to be destroyed, my brain did not compute that the game wanted me to waste more time there. The idea was to make disabling the disruptor challenging with enemies around, but most players would just beat them all up first. Another example happens late in the game. After unlocking the elevator that takes Batman to his confrontation with Strange, you have to hack another terminal inside. They couldn't just place floor buttons inside the elevator. No, every interface has to be built around Batman's tools. And why do we have to tune to the coordinates every time one of Riddler's hostages gives Batman a new set of numbers? That's not gameplay, it's pure work.
I would claim to be surprised at this attempt to retrieve the location before collecting enough secrets, but I am not. It was entirely predictable.
Arkham City's joyless story begins with Bruce Wayne being imprisoned in Hugo Strange's new Arkham project, 18 months after the incident at the asylum. Strange learned that Wayne is Batman in some previous episode that we never got to play. He threatens to reveal Wayne's secret if he tries to stop him from executing something called Protocol 10, but never goes through with his threat.
I feel I should thank you. Capturing Bruce Wayne is so much easier than Batman. Protocol 10 is ready to begin. It will be my legacy, a monument to your failure. And if you try to stop me, I guarantee everyone will know your secret.
No explanation is given for the arrest, and the police and military never try to break in and take back their billionaire. If the story made sense, Wayne would have been framed for something. The Titan formula that Joker infected himself with at the end of Arkham Asylum has mutated into a fatal disease. Joker gives Batman a blood transfusion, infecting him with the virus. Apparently they have the same blood type. The clown wants to spread the virus throughout Gotham.
Where is the cure? Who has it?
I had our cold-hearted friend Mr. Freeze making it, but he's gone dark on me.
In the museum chapter, Batman frees Penguin's captive Mr. Freeze for a cure to the virus. I can't remember why Freeze agreed to make a cure for Joker. They have almost nothing in common. Anyway, after Freeze tells Batman that he first needs his suit back, Batman informs Freeze that Penguin is protecting himself with his ice gun. He does not tell Freeze that the suit is unprotected in the North Wing where he just came from, and Freeze does not call out his dishonesty later.
You don't understand. I cannot complete my work without it. I must have it. Everything depends on it. Everything.
Penguin is protecting himself with your ice gun. How do I get past it?
Penguin having Freeze's ice gun has nothing to do with Freeze needing a suit. Calling it dishonesty is obviously too generous to the writing and game design. Batman goes back to the North Wing and takes the disruptor from Freeze's suit, which lets him disable Penguin's ice gun in the Iceberg Lounge, which is in the West Wing.
Me neither.
After a fight with Solomon Grundy, whose presence may confuse casual comic book fans because he doesn't even get a story, Mr. Freeze tells Batman that he can easily make a cure, but it needs a restorative enzyme. This makes Batman think of the immortal Ra's al Ghul, whose minion, in writing that only a child could come up with, just happens to be in a display case in the same room.
Blasphemer! You are not worthy to speak of the great Ra's al Ghul!
He tracks her to Ra's and the League of Assassins in the Old Wonder City. Penguin and Freeze have little if anything to do with the game's main villains, Joker and Hugo Strange, nor do Two-Face and Poison Ivy who appear in other chapters. Even though the game is not long, the coming and going of all these characters turns parts of the story into prolonged slogs, as you try to remember how your current task was supposed to lead to Batman's goal. Solomon Grundy's appearance is probably the most offensive. No scenes before or after the fight. I would have rather fought that animatronic dinosaur at the entrance of the museum than see Grundy used and dumped like that, and I don't even particularly care about the character. If the writers wanted an ensemble of villains and good structure, then they should have split each game into loosely connected episodes, some of which could have featured other protagonists, namely Robin and Batgirl. Episodes exploring different genres and tones, like campy adventure, horror, and comedy. Before Batman finds Wonder City, Robin gives him the line launcher. This 90-second appearance is his first in the Arkham series. As if the structure wasn't already messy enough, he would not be seen again until Harley Quinn's Revenge, the brief story DLC for Arkham City. Ra's al Ghul is poorly used. The material had already been covered in other media like the animated series, possibly dabbling in the same continuity, judging from how well Batman knows Ra's and his daughter Talia. Again, the 600-year-old father asks Batman to take his place, and again he threatens to kill his daughter. I wouldn't have minded this retelling of the story if Batman had encountered Ra's and his League of Assassins for the first time. Watching Talia and Batman's relationship develop sounds more interesting to me than coming in years later after some events that you read or watched in the comics or cartoons already happened, but others, like Ra's threatening to kill her, apparently did not. It speaks to a bigger problem with the Arkham games, that Batman already knows almost all of the characters, and fans can't tell what they have already been through together. Regardless, this whole Ra's al Ghul story would have worked better as a standalone adventure that took Batman out of Gotham City for once. Much of the chapter is a hallucination of sorts. I think the main problem with the cliché video game hallucinations and dreams that became so common after Arkham Asylum and Far Cry 3 is that they are simultaneously too real and alien. The mechanics and movement of the character are barely different from the character's waking, sober experiences, while the landscapes are too bizarre to draw from them. I have never played a video game dream and thought for a second that the character was awake. It's never subtle.
What?
A problem, sir?
It's not here.
What's not here, sir?
You know what I'm talking about. The entrance to the Batcave. Why is it sealed up?
Batcave? I'm sorry, I don't...
That's right, Alfred. The Batcave. It's a big hole in the ground with a big car in it that's all black. Remember?
Son, you sound upset. Is something the matter?
No, it's impossible.
It's nice to see you in good humor again, Master Bruce.
Why shouldn't I be? My life is a dream, Alfred. The best dream anyone ever had.
I'll just prepare your suit for the opera tonight.
You do that, Alfred.
The end of the Ra's al Ghul hallucination highlights some of the poorer boss design of this series. The combat that you've used for hours is largely thrown out the window. You now shoot the electric gun through gaps in Raz's spinning defense and try to roll away from his giant swords by double tapping the run button. When you fought normal enemies, Batman started running automatically once the combo was active, but boss fights don't have so many opportunities for combos. Instead, you continuously hold that run button down with the side of your index finger while navigating the camera with your thumb. I have always played these games with a mouse and keyboard. The forced walking would have driven me mad if I couldn't make Batman run by holding the spacebar down with my unused thumb. It's easier to spam the electrical charges than to time them. For the other halves of the fight, you battle a bunch of fakes and roll away before the real Raz can attack you. Each stage of the boss features a checkpoint that brings you back with full health, in part because the developers knew the design was too weird and would set players up for failure after the game did not establish the style of play earlier. It becomes obvious not long after leaving Wonder City that Strange is Ra's al Ghul's puppet. Their motivations are similar and the game leaves so many hints.
I'll tell you everything! Strange came to me back at the asylum. He told me he had friends, powerful friends, the sort of people who could make things happen. All I had to do was turn a blind eye to his experiments and work on my campaign. He said his friends would ensure that I won.
Who are they?
I have no idea. I never met them. They funded everything. Money was no problem. All I had to do was set up Arkham City and put Strange in charge. It made perfect sense. The scum of Gotham needed to be punished.
I will take my rightful place at my master's side. We will rule over this world.
So, you failed to live up to his expectations. How predictable.
Raz dies 2 minutes after the revelation, wasting the setup with little payoff. Learning that Raz was behind it essentially doesn't change anything for Batman. There's no new obstacle for him in Raz, no next chapter in that part of the story. It's good that the game is almost over at this point because the simplistic fights became rote a while ago. Minutes later, we get the ending with another revelation. Joker was actually Clayface some of the time. We are never told why Clayface helped Joker. This is his first appearance in the game. Did I mention that the story has too many villains?
Talia!
Oh. I'm sorry, beloved. I didn't know.
Encore! More! Bravo! Ladies and gentlemen, for one night only, standing in for yours truly, and doing a damn fine job of it, I give you Clayface!
You weren't even supposed to be in here, Carl. Why sign up with Joker?
The role of a lifetime!
The Clayface fight is similar to the Ra's al Ghul fight. Just spam the gadget as much as you can, roll away from his long-range attacks, and mash through the crowd.
Quick! The cure! What are you waiting for? Come on! I killed your girlfriend, poisoned Gotham in hell. It's not even breakfast. But so what? We all know you'll save me.
Every decision you've ever made ends with death and misery. People die. I stop you. You'll just break out and do it again.
Think of it as a running gag. No! Are you happy now?
Do you want to know something funny? Even after everything you've done, I would have saved you.
You know, that actually is pretty funny.
Even to the very end, Batman won't kill Joker, yet he was perfectly happy to drop goons on their heads from several meters up and explode them with gel and their own minds. They were only unconscious, probably. Strict pacifism has no place in a video game about Batman. There are too many things that can happen to his opponents. You wouldn't want them to bounce off invisible walls when you're on a rooftop or high catwalk. Having Batman automatically catch them with a rope would only disrupt the action. Since there's no way to believably save every opponent, the story should mostly ignore that aspect of Batman. If he kills a few, It's for a greater good. Even if the man you just let fall from a rooftop never committed any serious crime and was not involved in some evil plan, it would be better to score the player negatively at the end of the game or call the player out on it like the Metal Gear Solid games used to than to save the man by restricting the physics. Conveniently, every single regular enemy that Batman defeats loses consciousness. Could the developers not leave some writhing and moaning on the floor?
Hold it right there! Let the lady go, Bat Freak, or these people...
Do we really need dialogue and cutscenes injected every 2 minutes? There's so little freedom in the Arkham games because of the importance placed on the story and the constant exposition. The overworld feels rather dead after the story is over, with the chaptered side quests not amounting to much. One quest has you listening for ringing payphones, tracing the serial killer Zsasz as he talks about himself, and then rushing to his last location in a series that feels endless.
This is not over. It cannot be over.
The Deadshot story is similar in its repetition. You investigate the scene of a dead body, track where the sniper shot came from, and then maybe find a clue there before repeating the cycle someplace else. When you finally face off against him, all you have to do is sneak up as his laser sight slowly circles the area and then take him from a conveniently placed floor grill.
No one is better than me. Not even the great Batman. Where have you gone, Batman?
You would expect an encounter with the Mad Hatter to be more thoughtful, but the only gameplay is simply another brawl in a world as bizarre as the Ra's al Ghul hallucination. Why is it that a television program can tell a story like Perchance to Dream, but video game developers take the same villain, a manipulator of the mind, and only think of the most insane overt visuals?
Well, Mr. Wayne, you need professional help. Liar! You know what's going on. This is a dream, and you're the one responsible. A dream? Why do you think that? I suspected it from the start. I knew I was right when I tried to read the newspaper. The print didn't make sense. Yes? That's because reading is a function of the right side of the brain, while dreams come from the left side. It's impossible to read something in a dream.
Like I said earlier, video game dreams and hallucinations are never subtle. The gory identity thief quest doesn't have an ending.
As with the others, the victim's face was removed pre-mortem with surgical precision. The care taken suggests the killer is more concerned with the parts he's taking than what he leaves behind.
This is the journal of Dr. Thomas Elliot. My work is complete. The pain, though still present, has been worth it. He will suffer for what he did to me.
Hush leaves his hideout, locking Batman inside.
You look just like Bruce Wayne.
It took time, of course, to find the perfect donors, to graft on the flesh, and finally to lose myself in order to create this. 6 people died. Unfortunate, but necessary to complete my plan. I can see you have your hands full.
Even though it takes Batman only 12 seconds to unlock the door, he prefers to speak with Oracle a while as the sadistic serial killer gets away. He closes the case before leaving the hideout, having already decided that he can't track him like he did several others earlier in the game.
Close the file on the identity thief, Oracle.
Have you caught him?
No. Prepare a new file on Dr. Thomas Elliot. I'm uploading all the details from his surgery.
Elliot? The famous surgeon? Didn't you used to be friends?
We were. A long time ago.
So he was the identity thief? Hang on. This says he used the faces he collected to make a new one that looked like yours. I mean, Bruce Wayne's. Is he crazy? No offense. Are you going after him?
He's gone. He's left Arkham City. I'll hunt him down tomorrow.
Another quest has you destroy all the Titan containers for Bane. When you return to him, you are both ambushed and fight together to protect the remaining Titan. He reuses all the animations and attacks from the couple of Titans you fought earlier. He betrays you, but there's no second half where you fight him because the developers weren't going to build another boss fight for content few players will get to.
Titan is too powerful to be used against me. I needed it all for myself. Now, do me a favor and die! Ah! No!
I knew I couldn't trust you, Bane, so I used you instead.
What?
Simple. You rounded up the remaining Titan. Now, I can destroy it.
Stop! Please!
Fewer still will be dedicated enough to collect all the Riddler trophies, save the last of his hostages, and defeat him. The final hostages are not even part of a challenge like the 5 prior ones, since Riddler doesn't expect you for ones. You simply move behind the hostages who have been forced to walk for hours, and then watch as Batman pulls their captor through the floor. What?
This cannot be happening. Do you really expect me to fall for this Dark Knight? I know you won't kill me.
True, but you can't say the same about the others, can you?
Get your ass moving, Riddler.
You can't tell me what to do.
Do I need to press the button?
What? No. You'll pay for this, Batman.
You sure this thing won't work?
No. But there's no point in letting him know that, is there?
It reminded me of the useless reward for getting all 120 stars in Super Mario 64. More for its notoriety, since I still found the process of completing the game funner than what Riddler offered in that depressing city. The stars weren't all revealed on some map for me. Overall, the quests are too simplistic to justify the open world. The character designs of the Arkham games are in this ugly middle between cartoon and busy realism. Comic book artists intentionally keep their designs simplistic because they have to draw them over and over, while many video game artists clutter theirs with too much detail, not understanding that simplicity can make them more visually striking. They don't need to think about it because they only have to model and texture the character one time, aside from slight edits that make them appear more worn and beat up over time. Batman's physique is so badly balanced. They put so much muscle on him that he looks short and malformed from certain angles. He had pretty big shoulders in the animated series, but here it looks strange because the art leans so much more towards realism. I hate how metallic and angular the heavy gloves, boots, and belt are. When you add all the punch holes and seams, the design becomes much more about the suit than about the man. Talia al Ghul looks like a biker. I understand that those colorful flowing desert garbs that you wore in other media might look out of place in Gotham City, but they could have gone with a more minimalist femme fatale appearance or something. There are so many lines, belts, hooks, and buttons on the pebbled leather that you focus less on the woman, the character. Why do her assassins have all those ugly tattoos and not she as a member of the same order? I don't understand what they were going for with Catwoman. If the layer with the hexagonal patterns beneath is a bodysuit, then why the flat layers that are split all over on top? I guess it's all sewn together with the top layer acting as stronger protection, but the straps resembling garters over her butt make it confusing. The way the top layer of the back of the legs makes those flat angles as it runs down makes no sense from a utility perspective, nor does it look sexy. The zipper goes too low. If you go that low, you might as well continue over the whole pelvis, and then it will just look fetishistic. How low she has the puller and how the artists relied on rigid graphics to keep the open part of her suit always standing up like that bothers me too. The high collar doesn't work for me either because of how open the chest area already is. If they wanted a prominent collar, then they should have started the zipper and collar at her cleavage. I don't care for that thong and stocking design in the back. Prior designs clearly had sex appeal, but they were less overt and more tasteful than this. The patterns and angles, how they're so intricately sewn together, imply that she has the same resources as Batman, that she can order expensive military or police-grade equipment in sectionals in bulk to reduce suspicion, and then finish putting them together herself like in Batman Begins. If you look at her neck, you will notice that the mask and choker are a single piece separated by two straps. Either have the mask cover her whole neck or separate the choker. This just looks needlessly complicated. Why the belts on her sides? What are they supposed to do? Because leather wasn't fancy enough, the whip is made out of metal. Again, too much information in the design. Also, why give her the protective goggles if she only pulls them over her eyes while using X-ray vision? I think she only has them over her eyes in one cutscene. Makes them look so useless on her head. The Catwoman of Arkham Knight has a more human face. Her costume kept many of the problems and put a stupid cat brooch on her chest, but the patterns are at least simpler. Those glowing vines on Ivy's body, the green skin with green eyes, the way her floating hair moves by itself, the panties made of foliage. Individually, some of those details would be fine, but together they are excessive. Her best designs are the more subtle ones in my opinion, the ones who could seduce because they're still so human, who can blend into society with only glasses and a suit. The games may have been aimed most at fans of the DC animated universe, with the reprisals of Kevin Conroy as Batman, Mark Hamill as Joker, and at least in Arkham Asylum, Arlene Sorkin as Harley Quinn. But Clayface, Killer Croc, Bane, and Solomon Grundy have none of the humanity and dignity of Bruce Timm's designs.
I'm not an actor anymore. I'm not even a man.
So tell us, friend, from whence do you hail?
See, I was part of this freak show, same as you. Only they kept me chained like an animal, day and night.
Toys. You try to fight me with pathetic little toys.
Birdnose helps Grundy, but Birdnose and her friends hate Grundy.
Grundy helped Birdnose. Birdnose helped Grundy, okay?
Excuse me. Hot girl smash.
They look so sinister and grotesque. Croc with those long, horrible teeth. Clayface with a face resembling a skull. Solomon Grundy, now an ugly giant with huge veins and bright glowing eyes. Bane's hoses and neon bright veins are ridiculous. His head is too low or his upper back is too high or both. It almost looks like the back of his head comes out of the neck, like his brain goes into his neck. Let us not forget Joker's disgusting appearance as the final boss in Arkham Asylum. Why did he have a mohawk after becoming Titan Joker? I don't care for Joker's regular appearance either. The projecting chin and nose stand out on a model that's otherwise pretty normal in a world with mostly human proportions, barring, of course, the hulking muscle look that's unfortunately all over the trilogy. Harley Quinn's tattoos complete her trashy look. The original Jester style was the only one that ever worked for me. Also, Catwoman and Harley can't both have chokers in the same game. She is overused, by the way. We didn't need the Joker and her in every game in Rocksteady's trilogy. Batgirl is cute. Putting Barbara Gordon in a wheelchair in the only video games that we'd have for however many years was a waste of a fun character. Robin and Batgirl should have been playable in their own full story starting with the second game, even if it meant shortening Batman's campaign. Arkham Knight finally made her a playable character in a short prequel DLC, but I do not care for her design. At 5 feet and 11 inches, she is almost the same height as Robin and Nightwing, and not that much shorter than Batman. You don't need to read her in-game bio to see that she is pretty tall. It's obvious when she stands next to the criminals. Curiously, Tim Drake grew 2 inches between Arkham City and Arkham Knight. Another detail that would have helped to differentiate Batgirl from Batman and Robin is a shorter cape. Her suit also has too many distracting angles and lines. I can't tell which parts are hard leather and which are plastic or steel. All the armor and padding take away from the theatricality of these characters and conceal the athletic physiques that are supposed to make them appear extraordinary. Realistically, the armor would encumber Batman and his allies and make them more audible when they try to sneak. You would hear all the metal, plastic, and stiff leather. Skin-tight outfits also make gunfire more visually threatening.
I want to talk a little bit about the costume because that's something that a lot of people bring up.
Eon's? Or
yes, Eon's costume is why she's dressed like that. And it has a lot to do with the fact that she doesn't talk and she really has to use her body to express what she's thinking and feeling. And I did try initially to design costumes which were more realistic or more practical, but what you find out is that to draw realistic costuming requires a lot of attention paid to things like folds in the clothing, the way that the clothes hang on the body, and you end up wasting a lot of time just trying to figure that out, which in the end isn't important, and in the end actually works against what you're trying to do, which is use as much of the body's expressive qualities as possible. It's the reason why artists have always preferred to portray the nude, because to portray a clothed figure, again, it becomes more about the costume and less about the person. And I think that's one of the reasons also why comic book artists draw their characters in skin-tight outfits, is to reveal different forms that the anatomy takes. And it's also true of dancers, actually. The reason why dancers wear skin-tight costumes or very revealing costumes. It's because they have to use their bodies. And I was really thinking of Eon as a dancer and choreographing her movements in that way.
The voice acting is good, but that should be expected when a project is funded by a giant studio. Still, the lead is played by a curiously uncharismatic Kevin Conroy.
I'm nearly at the top. I'll stop him.
I know. How did he ever manage all this? He's killed hundreds of people, and he's got full authorization from the city. It's insane.
He's working with someone. I intend to find out who the moment I stop Protocol 10. Joker's got his crew moving through the sewers, hunting down what's left of Penguin's thugs.
I was grabbed outside the hospital I intern at. They drugged me, and I woke up in a building, up there.
The person in charge here has been rounding up doctors to try to fix Joker. Looks like you were unlucky.
He's dying, right?
It seems that way.
Is it wrong not to feel bad about that? What now?
You need to stay here. Keep out of sight, and you'll be fine. I'll be back.
It's probably not a good idea to have enemies talk so much and let the player hear them all from afar over Batman's earphones if you only have a few voice actors for them. They all sound the same. Almost everything they talk about involves the characters and story, as if none of them have personalities or interests. All the reporters in the opening wear hats. That old style doesn't appear anywhere else in the game. The music is fine. Much of the score imitates Hans Zimmer's unremarkable Dark Knight trilogy, like a number of animated Batman movies of that time. Zimmer never really had a heart for melody. I can remember the music in Gladiator and Black Hawk Down and not much else. The Lion King's instrumentals were also good, as I recall. But for so many other movies, he composed moods rather than memorable melodies. I have no idea why Rain Man got him the Academy Award nomination. Nikita by Eric Serra sounds weirder and far more interesting than Zimmer's score for the remake Point of No Return. I have heard that he now uses ghostwriters for a lot of his music. Anyway, modern Batman scores, including the games, are such a far cry from the melodies in Danny Elfman's Batman and Batman Returns, and the work Shirley Walker supervised and sometimes composed herself for the animated series. The Batman franchise is sadly too big for Warner Brothers to give the character the games that he deserves. They could target more discerning players by budgeting more modestly, but prefer a bland product that appeals to as many people as possible, like nearly all AAA developers. Obviously, it paid off for them. I wonder how profitable and influential the Arkham series would have been if it wasn't about Batman. Do people really like the gameplay design and art direction that much? If you thought this critique was too negative, then consider it a contrast to more popular YouTubers praising so many of the things that I complained about. I found it hard to finally sit down and listen to what they had to say as I finished this months-long project, which will likely remain the only one of its kind on my channel. I did not explain every maneuver and threat because the game fails at the fundamentals that they are built upon. Playing through Arkham City again 10 years later made me dislike the trilogy more than I did before. I'm embarrassed that I ever thought it was a good game.